Good afternoon to those of us who are here in person and to those of us who are joining us online or virtually. I think, first of all, I'm really happy to be here in physical form, in person meeting. This is already, I think, cause for celebration, given where we have been for the last 2 years. And I think by now, each one of us have had a share of online meetings and online presence. So this is a very refreshing experience to actually being here in physical form, talking to each other, looking at each other and each other in the face, which has been quite an experience in of itself. And seeing each other without masks, another improvement. And so I wanted to thank the MBRF and the Knowledge Summit for actually organizing this event and starting to bring people together again in physical form. And it's only fitting that the name of this session in particular is how COVID-19 is reshaping the legal landscape. Obviously, on the one hand, the fact that we're here in the physical form today is reminiscent of how things used to be before COVID-19, i.e. we actually met in person. So I think in some sense, it's still a sort of remnant of how the world used to be. But on the other hand, I think we cannot deny the fact that the legal landscape in particular has changed substantially and significantly since COVID-19 hit us by surprise. And so we're here to talk about exactly that. Each one of us comes from fairly different aspect of the legal landscape, the legal profession. So we actually are short of one other speaker who was going to contribute about her experience from the in-house practice perspective. But there is certainly quite an esteemed panel still, so I'm excited to hear what you have to share with the audience. And so without further ado, I wanted to introduce our speakers today. So I'm the moderator of the panel, as is perhaps obvious by now. My name is Ludmila Yamalova, and I'm a US qualified lawyer who have been practicing in the UAE for the last 14 years. I do call it my home now. And I run my own practice, but it's a small practice. But I am a very active and sort of loyal contributor, if you will, to the UAE legal practice. And love this country. I'm passionate about leaving, hopefully, a positive footprint on the development of the UAE legal profession. And so now, next to me is Ms. Amna Owais, who is the Chief Registrar of the DIFC courts and a legend in her own right. Although she's very young, but she certainly has a lot to her name. Among other things, she spearheads special projects at the DFC courts, including involving technology and innovation. And she's also the Registrar of the Special Tribunal for the Dubai World. She's a chairperson of the DFC Courts Users Committee and a chairperson also for the chairwoman, I guess, for the in-house council committee. And she also works in close partnership with Smart Dubai and Dubai Future Foundation to harness, among other things, digital transformation for court services. And we have seen that in practice. And also we've got Dr. Habib Mulla, who does not really need much introduction. He truly is a legend in his own right as well. But since he's here, I will mention a few things. Dr. Habib Mulla is executive chairman of his private practice, Habib Mulla and Partners, and one of the UAE's truly most highly respected legal authorities with 37 years of experience. And he has contributed to the development of the UAE's legislation and contributed to drafting a lot of the laws. And he holds many, many senior titles, which are well-deserved. And among other things, some of the previous titles is a member of the UAE Federal National Council and the Legislative Committee. So without further ado, I wanted to we have a few questions we wanted to discuss today's panel, so I will start with the first one, and that is, what are the three, since the topic of today's session, once again, is how COVID-19 is reshaping legal landscape. So the first question I'd like to raise is, what are the three main challenges that you have observed and implemented in your respective industries as a result of coronavirus? And since each of you comes from different aspects of the legal practice, Ms. Amna comes from the court or the judicial perspective, and Dr. Habib Mulla from private practice. So what are some of the three specific changes that you have experienced, and what can you share with us about that? So I'll start with Amna, if you may.
Thank you, Ludmila, for this introduction. Maybe lots of you don't know who we are. So DIFC is the Dubai International Financial Center. And within the center, we have three center bodies: the regulator, the executive arm, as well as the court. So it's in a way a country within a country, if we can say that, and we can use that analogy. So within the DIFC courts, we follow the common law system. And the common law system is a system that adjudicates cases within the common law system, which means through precedents of older cases that people, or let's say judges, need to follow those precedents. And we have commercial and civil cases only. We don't have any jurisdiction over criminal matters. Within the DIFC, we were fortunate enough as a young court to already have a long, let's say, digital transformation journey. And once the pandemic hit, we were really ready to, we were equipped with our technologies, our softwares, that we were able to switch electronically straight away within 24 hours, really. And I would say, if I want to focus for the specific questions, three items that we were able to enhance is that we became fully paperless as a court. Of course, under Dubai's vision back in 12 December 2021, the whole government of Dubai became paperless. But we were already in that journey since 2017, where we started our operations. Our day-to-day management of the cases was fully, in a way, ready for this journey. And as of 2020, we became fully paperless, whether from a court perspective, from a core business case handling, or from an operational perspective. The whole transactions are fully paperless. Second of all, our hearings are fully virtual now. Since the court has international bench of judges, we always had video conferencing. We had smart, Skype for Business, Teams before the pandemic hit. However, we're never at full capacity as virtual hearings. And now, since the pandemic, we are fully virtual, as in 100% of the cases are managed online virtually. And the third item is the remote work policies. Before the pandemic hit, since we had a lot of hype around future of work and how people should have this work-life balance, and I sometimes call it work-life integration, and not really balance, it's more of an integration. Back in 2019, we actually had a new policy of having 7 days a year. We were allowed to have remote work days, only 7 days. However, as soon as the pandemic hit, of course, we were fully working remotely. The whole, basically, everyone on the planet started working remotely. However, as of December 2020, we decided, of course, again, like a lot of governments in the world, including the UAE, we started applying remote work as a fully fledged policy. There is no maximum on the number of days you want to work remotely as of today. It's very flexible. It all depends on the role and the capacity. So we became even more futuristic in the ways of doing business, whether from a customer perspective or, again, from a culture perspective in terms of the teams operating within the courts. So these are the three items.
And before I ask Dr. Habib Al-Mulla about his experience, I do want to also comment from our perspective. I'm also in private practice, and when the pandemic did hit, everybody sort of scratched their heads, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to function, particularly in professional services, where everything previously required physical visit, physical submissions and such. And I truly was astonished how quickly Dubai in particular was able to go online, and we have experienced it with the DIFC courts in particular. And I just remember how many years back Dubai had announced this smart government, e-government, and I was just like, I don't understand what all this means. But the pandemic truly brought to light what that had meant back then. It's just the government had already thought of these initiatives and placed a lot of the founding blocks early on. And so the pandemic just basically, it almost felt like the foundation had already been laid, and it was just a matter of pushing the button, and the system was already up and running. So it was truly quite amazing, especially as compared to how other countries were handling their legal practice. So we have seen it in firsthand, and I'm not just saying this because we're here speaking with you, but truly we were quite astonished how quickly we were able to evolve and take it to the next level. And so, Dr. Habib Al-Mulla, and since you're coming from the private practice, what are some of the three most significant changes you have experienced, perhaps implemented or spearheaded as part of your practice that were directly related or resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah. I think it's undoubtedful that the pandemic took everyone by surprise. No one was prepared for the pandemic. Yes, different institutions had different preparation for their own purposes. Like Amna mentioned, for example, because DIFC courts were relying on virtual hearings by nature of the structure that they have, so they may have been more prepared than others. But the bottom line is, it took everyone by surprise. And I think what it did is that it put a kind of what I call a stress test on the mechanisms that institutions, whether public or private, had. So yes, we have an IT system. How solid that IT system is, how good it is, how it's going to function, it put everything on a stress test. Now, in the private practice, especially when we are talking about the legal field and law firms, one of the main aspects of conducting legal business is that you tend, by nature of your work, to meet with clients, to meet with your colleagues, to discuss with them. And suddenly, you find yourself that, well, you can't meet anyone anymore. You need to do and conduct everything virtually. How that is going to work, it was an experience. So the first thing was to move the mentality of being used to physical meetings into a virtual meetings. And it's not easy. I mean, when I was just coming, I was planning to arrange a meeting with one of lawyers who has been in town also for like many years. So I told him, okay, I'm going to this summit. Once I finish, we can have a call. He said, but can we have an in-person meeting? Can we do that tomorrow in person? Still, that in-person thing is well rooted into us. So first of all, moving everyone suddenly telling them, well, you can't have any meetings more, you have to do virtually, you have to meet your clients virtually, you have to discuss with colleagues virtually. It was, the first thing was a cultural shock. People were not used to this. Yes, you may have the mechanism, you have Team, you have Zoom, you have all these things, but can you function at the same level when you are functioning virtually compared to when you are functioning physically? So I think that was the main change and the main test that we had to go through. When you have physical meetings, when you have physical co-working, sometimes it's easier because to test the performance because we have the mechanism. We had it for many years. We know how to test the performance of people. But how you do the performance and review the performance of people when they are working from home, when they are having virtual meetings, that was the first test and change that the management of law firms had to adapt in order to be able to function properly. So that, I think, was one of the main things. The second change was, okay, people have moved now to a virtual work climate and work atmosphere. You managed to make things run smoothly. By the time you built some tools in order to review their performance, so you have a good capture on that. And then suddenly the pandemic is slowing down, people are getting vaccinated, vaccines are there, and some protocols are put in place. Now you need to convince people to come back to work. People got used to work from home. They're very much in their comfort zone. That was another change that we need to go through because there was some reluctance and resistance, in fact, to work from office. Because people were saying, well, if we are able to function properly, why do you insist that we should come back to office? We can do our work from home, we can look and be with our family, we can take care of our children and so on. So why do you want us to come back to office? That's another change that you had to push people to be able to do that. Now, what has changed? I think the changes that Corona, the pandemic has made, some of them are irreversible. There is nothing called working 5 days from office anymore. That's, I think, over, it's finished. The maximum you can think of is some hybrid combination whereby you have like 3 days in office, 2 days at home, or 3 days at home and 2 days at office. Some sort of this kind of combination. For example, we until now, we have this policy that you can work 2 days from home. And with Friday being a working day, that gave the people the opportunity to utilize Friday also to work from home in order to be in line with what they were used to. The third change, which I think is also irreversible, is the whole idea of an office, a physical office space. We were used that everyone wants to have his own space, his own desk, his own office, closed doors. That was an expensive model previously, but for some reason, just people continued with it. Today, it's become too expensive. It became very logicless concept to continue with from an efficiency purpose. Why does everyone need his own office space? Yes, you will need some meeting rooms, definitely, but there is no need for every and each individual to have his own, neither office space nor even desk. So, for example, what we are doing is that we are increasing what we call the common spaces. Basically, it's a space. Anyone can just book his space whenever he's coming to the office. He has his laptop, he desks it on the desk, and he works on. He doesn't own that space anymore. Anyone can utilize that space. That together, combined with the fact that you work only 3 days from at office and 2 days at home, increases the efficiency of utilizing the real estate. So you don't need to expand. Just before the pandemic, we were thinking of renting another floor in order to make more space for work. That idea, we have completely abolished it now. We don't need that. And we are utilizing whatever space we have. That trend will continue, and people will think more efficiently in using that real estate aspect. That led to some technologies that people never thought of. I saw that day there was a brochure of some sort of a cabin, basically, whereby you fix these cabins in the office space. It gives enough space to conduct your work, and at the same time, you can isolate it. So if you are having a call, a conference call, you are isolated. It's soundproof, and it works well. Now, it's expensive. I think each cabin is costing, if it's a single cabin, it's costing like something, if I'm not mistaken, 15,000 euros. But the idea of it, if, for example, you decided to move from this location to another location, you just take your cabin and take it with you. Nothing is, you don't lose anything. While in previous model where you had fixtures and furnitures, you tended to lose much of that when you are moving from one space to another. So I think we are still in that transition period. People are adapting to the new system. New technologies are coming. Work from home will continue in a hybrid form. Zoom and team meetings will continue in a hybrid form. Yes, not all hearings will be virtual, but at the same time, not all hearings will continue to be physical. The last thing on this point, what the last change is, the whole concept of business travel has changed. Previously, I personally used to travel at least twice a month, either to attend a meeting or a conference or a seminar or this. Today, I think if I manage to fly 6 times in a year, that would be an achievement. Why do we need to fly if we can have virtual conferences, virtual seminars, even in hearings? Most of the procedural hearings, in my opinion, will continue to be virtual. Yes, the hearings on merits where you have cross-examination of witnesses, that will most probably move back into physical hearings. But other than that, most of the procedural hearings will be conducted in a virtual form, which saves cost, saves time on everyone, parties and institutions. So business meetings, again, will be in a hybrid form. Business travel will be less. And the efficiency of real estate and work from home, I think these are the three changes that law firms will go through.
So, Dr. Habib, you've mentioned efficiency of real estate. How about efficiency in terms of work product and contribution of both from the employee standpoint and also perhaps from the litigant standpoint, from the courts? Have you seen decrease in efficiency, increase in efficiency, confused efficiency? Because let's face it, as you said, we're all kind of working all the time, but are we really working? Because we're running around surrounded by our kids, trying to feed them and talk to clients at the same time.
Initially, yes. I have to admit, people used to attend meetings in pajamas. Happen if they forget to turn off their screens. People used to attend hearings from coffee shops. That's a reality. But I think things started to be more disciplined. People started to be more disciplined, and institutions insisted on some discipline. For example, Dubai courts and the federal courts in the past few months, they issued a discipline on how to attend virtual hearings. You need to be properly dressed. You need to make sure that you're isolated from sound around you. It should be a decent place. You cannot have it from a coffee shop, for example. So things, and I don't blame anyone. It was a learning exercise. But the efficiency, yes, initially it dropped, but I think it's where it should be today.
And from the court's perspective, have you seen any drop in efficiency or improved efficiency from the litigant standpoint in terms of how, I guess, they respond to the court's deadlines, instructions? Has it been easier or challenging at times?
For us, in terms of the DIFC courts, I think it became more efficient. We always, as Dr. Habib mentioned, we always had the infrastructure and the systems available. Since we're an international court, half of our judges actually operate from different locations before the pandemic. Of course, we did not go 100% virtual before the pandemic. We had just few types of applications, maybe urgent hearings, items that required a specific judge would have been online, virtual. Apart from that, everything was face-to-face. So as far as we're concerned, I believe efficiency was already there, if I may say. Efficiency was already there. What actually helped us during the pandemic is to really think about our services, how we deliver our products, how we make sure that we continue a customer-centric court. Since we are a court that focuses on service excellence due to our opt-in jurisdiction, due to our special nature where parties choose to come to the DIFC courts, we really were focusing on how to continue that service delivery and make sure that our systems, whether for the litigants in person, whether for the lawyers, continued in their best possible way in terms of the delivery. So I would say efficiency continued, especially since we had many KPIs, many high-level objectives that actually operated the court's culture in terms of the employees, how they actually manage their work and so forth. So I believe internally and externally, it was efficient before, and it continued being efficient due to the nature of our courts and the systems available. Especially, anyway, the government was fully paperless by end of 2020, 2021. And that actually even accelerated from an even sustainability perspective. We are using less paper now. We are fully digital, and that actually increases accessibility. And I think that is your second question.
Indeed.
So in terms of accessibility, the DIFC course has always been accessible, where we had multiple channels of communication with our stakeholders. So we always had email, proactive email, not sending an email and not having a response for 3 or 4 weeks. We always responded to emails within 2 working days for simple matters, 5 working days for complex matters. We have the active call center from our own employees rather from an outsourced service. We always had walk-ins and so forth. But of course, with the pandemic, we had to re-engineer our services. Our pro bono program, we have a pro bono program within the DIFC, especially within the courts, but catering for the DIFC population in terms of employees, people who cannot afford legal advice. We had a fully fledged program before the pandemic with clinics face-to-face, online email services, telephone services. And after the pandemic, of course, we switched everything virtually through appointments that are taken with the lawyers who are helping us on a pro bono basis, in addition to the email systems. So I would say that in terms of our courts, generally speaking, people are intimidated of court systems around the world. However, we really want to change that outlook in terms of removing this thought process of courts as intimidating, government entities to a customer-centric, more of a service rather than a place that you go to. And that is really in our, in our DNA, how we operate our court system. And we really depend on technology as an enabler rather than saying technology is the answer for all problems. And as Dr. Habib said, actually, face-to-face interaction is still sometimes a requirement. People still insist on face-to-face because you get that energy, you get things dealt with rather than online or virtual. And I do believe both are important, but I think the future of work, the future of our courts at least, especially since the direction of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai, is that last year there was this announcement that at least 80% of federal court hearings would continue on a virtual basis. And we are looking at least after the pandemic, maintaining at least 90% of hearings on a virtual perspective. And that number, you might argue, what are the 10%, the remaining? They will be kept for more complex, more, let's say, appeal hearings that require that physical attendance. But apart from that, everything is virtual, including our will service as well.
And I have to say that that's one experience that we've had firsthand, is that I remember back in the old days, when to appear in the DIFC court, you required physical presence. And if somebody, and let's face it, Dubai is full of expats and people come and go, and there's a lot of professionals here that are often, as Dr. Habib said earlier, are traveling, or used to travel quite a bit. So people were not always available to come and attend hearings, and they would be penalized for that. And obviously that makes somewhat justice perhaps less accessible, because people have legitimate reasons not to be able to appear at a particular hearing. Similarly with the DIFC Will Center. Back in the old days, there was no other way to register a will except in physical form. And there were so many clients that we had that wanted to register a will, were willing to pay, and had the will already even drafted, but they were just not there physically to actually sign. And so we experienced, and back then we felt that, I mean, for people like that, for cases like that, the courts were less accessible. Now, since they've gone online, let's face it, the notaries went online, and all of a sudden you no longer had to come into the UAE and do a power of attorney here, or at least spend thousands of dollars in weeks to try to have it legalized from abroad. You no longer had to fly in here just to add your signature to the will. You no longer had to fly here to attend hearings, but you equally so were available to do all that, but now through technological means. So we have seen that justice has become, and the court systems have become a lot more accessible. And you used an interesting word, the intimidation. So truly, I mean, let's face it, we're in the legal profession, and it's not a very fuzzy and warm and soft kind of a field. And people are intimidated by lawyers. They're intimidated even more so by courts. And so, and having to appear there before a judge in a courtroom is, you know, kind of you shake at your knees. But having to do that now through the online kind of a buffer, it takes away that edge, and therefore allows people perhaps more access to justice. And so we've seen that from where we sit in my little small practice. And Dr. Habib, how have you experienced or observed that evolution of access to justice? Have you felt that it's become perhaps more accessible, maybe distorted in some ways, and maybe standards have fallen because people, I remember the first few hearings, in particular local courts, you know, the only you could see is their noses. I mean, obviously that also affects a little bit of professionalism.
I think what the pandemic has shown us is that how naive we were, thinking that everything should be done by physical attendance and appearance, and how things can efficiently be done without the need of people to attend. A simple example is notary public. I don't know how many of you have attended the Notary Public in Dubai to do, you will find long queues, people waiting by hundreds to do their jobs. You need to take a token, you need to wait until your time comes, and then you do. And they realize, well, why do you need all these people to come? You can do that all online. And today, I think almost all the notary public services, and I'm talking about the public, the government notary public services, are being done by online. You receive an OTP, you get a call from the notary, you notarize it, you receive everything. You don't need even to get out of your chair. Similarly, hearings. Many hearings can be done without people need to travel to the court, whether they are judges, whether they are lawyers, whether they are parties, and everything is being done efficiently. So I think that access to justice has been enhanced by the fact that we are able today to use all these technological advancements that we had, but we never thought that how to use it. We used it maybe it's like these telephones. We're using like 20% of its capacity, while we can use it at 100%.
I agree, and I have to tell you, we've had a few interesting experiences that way, because back in the old days, and it feels like old days by now, even though it's only been about 2 years, is that so many people just felt that it wasn't worth pursuing a court case because it just required a physical travel and visit. And also even in terms of private practice, retaining a local advocate, right? Or retaining lawyers, because how else would they know how to attend a court hearing in local courts in particular? So, but now, by having the ability to attend on their own with the translators and submit all the documents in the online court system, we see a lot more people willing to represent themselves and representing themselves. And we're also seeing that a lot of these government online services are more and more becoming not just digital accessible, but also language-wise, a user interface more accessible. So a lot of services, including Abu Dhabi courts, Dubai courts, even have a lot of these services in English. So all of a sudden, those who in the past would have perhaps not want to file a court case because it was just too expensive, too intimidating, now can go onto the court website and kind of guide themselves more or less how to set up their own court online system and make their own submissions and even appear in hearings, and because there's always a translator. So all of a sudden we see a lot of people perhaps using less lawyers and doing things on their own. And that's, perhaps on the one hand, for law practices, maybe it's not an ideal situation, but on the other hand, from I think the court standpoint, it's ideal because that opens up court systems to many more people and makes it a lot more affordable.
And just imagine the cost that is being saved by these virtual hearings. I mean, I'll just give an example of two situations, almost identical, one before the pandemic, one after the pandemic, especially in the field of international arbitration. I mean, I'm more involved in arbitration and attend as either counsel or an arbitrator. I recall, before the pandemic, there was a dispute between, I think it was a Jordanian and Saudi company. We had 3 arbitrators. The chairman was a French professor of law. We had a Jordanian lawyer, and I was the 3rd arbitrator. So you have 3 different nationalities. The hearing was conducted in Geneva. So you had to fly everyone to Geneva. You had to book a hotel for the hearing. Then you had on each side, I think about 3 or 4 lawyers, all had to fly in, all had to stay in Geneva Hotel for a hearing that lasted half a day. No one complained. That was the norm of life. Everyone expected that is a granted thing. After the pandemic, I was chairing an arbitration hearing. One of the arbitrators was based in the US, the other one was in Egypt. I was in Dubai. The 2 law firms, one was in Egypt, the other one was in Saudi. We held a virtual hearing. The hearing lasted for 3 days. 3 days of virtual hearings with cross-examining witnesses, everything online. Just imagine the cost of half a day arbitration compared to the cost of 3 full days of virtual hearing. In fact, today, if you ask for a physical hearing, I think the parties will start to question, why do you need a physical? Do you need a physical hearing with all the cost involved? So that reduces the cost of litigation, which takes us to your point that it makes justice more accessible to the parties.
And so, in light of your respective insight and comment, how do you feel that the UAE's legal industry's response to COVID-19, in light of the examples you've just brought up, perhaps has bolstered the country's position as a legal and business jurisdiction? Have you seen a notable difference that you would want to share specific examples of?
I think relatively, UAE has been more prepared than any other country in the region, at least, for moving everything virtual. The DIFC is just one example, but then you had the courts which had all these systems. Yes, they didn't use it as much as the DIFC courts, but then because of the pandemic, everyone had to use it. Today, I think UAE is ahead of everyone in the region, at least compared to the region, when you are talking about providing accessibility to justice. So it's cost effective, it's faster, it's easier and more efficient. Whether you are talking about courts, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, DIFC, whether you are talking about arbitration, DIAC or ICC in Abu Dhabi, I think the infrastructure was there. They just need that push for everyone to use it. Everyone had to use it. Everyone realized how efficient it is. And I think it will only, that's the first step. I think everyone from now on will just continue to think how to make this system more efficient.
And have you seen from the court's perspective?
Actually, I remember the story like around maybe January, Feb 2020. We were discussing the fact that how lawyers are really causing us a hard exercise in terms of using the e-systems and the virtual hearings, because we had virtual hearings up and running already. And we're trying to really change that mindset that you need to be there always in person. And we were trying to actually force them to do virtual hearings, but of course we couldn't force them, and that was always an option. As a default was face-to-face, and exceptional basis were virtual hearings. And I remember the chat saying that, you know what, as of March, we will issue a circular mandating all lawyers that practice before the DIFC courts for certain types of cases and hearings, they need to actually attend remotely. And we were thinking of, the strategy, how we can actually convince them, because of the fear of the unknown that, many people go through. And we're trying to tackle how we can convince the legal profession of actually getting used to the fact that things can be done online. And of course, then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit,
made it happen.
It was for us like, it was an opportunity, actually. It was, apart from the, let's say the complexities and the negativity of having, the pandemic and, unluckily, having to go through this whole process, we actually saw it as an opportunity as far as the court's operations as far as they were concerned at that time. And actually that accelerated, the availability and the willingness of people and, let's say, lawyers for the courts to actually embark this new journey. And now they're used to it, as we mentioned. Costs are saved. They don't really need to travel from the UK, from Australia, from these different places to come to the court hearings. Of course, for them, they really miss coming to Dubai. But I think, that those, legal fees incurred are much manageable now. And ironically, actually, online, I've seen many, like from the arbitration center's perspective, I've seen few fancy online services now that are provided by different suites of arbitration centers, like business centers, like in Canada and other places, that they're actually, utilizing this new era in their favor in a way. And now we have different options online as well. So I do believe that, the pandemic has accelerated many aspects. At least in our view, it actually made things even more efficient. In addition to, your question about the UAE and our position here, in terms of Dubai and UAE trying to be the best hub for doing business, and in terms of the DIFC courts providing that legal certainty that parties need, especially since we're an opt-in jurisdiction, we believe that when an economy is, when a court system is strong, then economies actually thrive and become even more successful. And that's actually through research and evidence, economies that are strong have important, or let's say, important legal developments, including court systems that are very strong as well. So we do believe that, the UAE has, of course, played a massive role in terms of equipping itself before the pandemic, and with the pandemic, even further accelerators in terms of how we continue that value proposition for people living and doing business in the UAE.
So as you both said, obviously the technology had been there for a long time, but what it required is a massive paradigm shift, mental shift, which now we have all kind of gone through and gotten used to. But having seen the embracement of the new technologies and its implementation, what other new technologies are we expecting, perhaps, to infiltrate our legal practice, if any? And I'm particularly referring, perhaps, to the big fancy word these days, metaverse. Are you planning to conduct hearings in metaverse? And Dr. Habib, are you planning to take your firm into the metaverse space? What other new technologies?
I think it's going to happen whether we like it or not. I think that's the next phase of using online and virtual meetings and hearings. I have to admit one thing. My grandson purchased one of these.
Oculus.
Yes, the thing that you put on your face. And so he
3D.
gave it to me to try it, and it was a boxing game. I was shocked by the quality of the atmosphere that you are transferred in. You are actually in an actual life. Now, imagine if that technology can be used for hearings, for some legal works, meetings. I think that will move the whole legal industry into a different level.
And are you planning to take the court into
In terms of the DIFC courts, we have the Courts of the Future Forum or working group since 2017. It's a partnership we have with the Dubai Future Foundation. Actually, today we had one of our meetings through the working group, and we were actually talking about the metaverse. And I said, you know what, now that Meta has opened headquarters here in Dubai, we need to actually meet them and explore opportunities that we might have there in the metaverse. Of course, I am definite that at some point we'll have also maybe a space in the virtual world as a metaverse world for court hearings. People can choose, as Dr. Habib mentioned, with the Oculus, you can choose maybe, a plaintiff or a defendant maybe on an island. You can choose, operating from a specific, landscape, whatever you like. As long as the trial and the case is actually going on, that's fine. So within the Courts of the Future, things that we actually are proud of, we've had really huge developments within the angle of Courts of the Future, whether Courts of the Blockchain, again, how we can use blockchain as a way of enforcing cross-border judgments around the world. We have the Core Tech Lab, which we actually invite startups to come and explore our ecosystems for problems by providing creative solutions. In addition to our courts of space, and last but not least, our digital economy court. So I do believe there are many new technologies. Again, I don't believe at some point humans will be replaced by robots. I don't think that we'll have, we might have robot judges just to help judges in their research and coming up with specific, let's say, analogies. But I do believe that we will always need that human interaction. Humans will always be there, I hope, inshallah. I don't believe that they will disappear, but technology, whether robots or AI, will actually enable us, as I mentioned, with these tools that were never available, rather than have a case, then a judge, let's say, study a case for 10 days, 3 weeks, depending on the complexity. They might actually have the research consolidated in maybe 1 or 2 days, rather than really spending so much time in trying to figure out the judgment. So I do believe there are many things in the landscape, metaverse, including smart contracts as well.
Okay, so final question in the interest of time, and I'm being signaled that we've been chatting for all too long, but what does all this mean for human capital? Do you see, you've already mentioned, Dr. Habib, that you've had to you've had to reduce your real estate because it's just not necessary anymore. Are you seeing a reduction in numbers of people that are there on the ground that you need to actually be working? Since we have the paperless and the AI doing a lot of the reviews in the past, humans would do. So are you seeing the difference in human capital? So last question.
Personally, I'm talking about our own experience. No. In fact, we're increasing. Now, this could be due to the fact maybe workload is more, maybe business is growing, that's different. Technology will make some tasks obsolete, probably, but I don't think it will ever reach a stage where it can be in lieu of human ability.
So you haven't had you haven't felt the need to reduce your staff?
No.
Okay, interesting. That's good to hear for us humans. And how about from the court perspective?
For the courts, we've been always operating within a really stretched resource. So in the DIFC court, again, this is a small court in the DIFC that has huge mandates. We're about 35 employees. So we already were multitasking in our day-to-day. Many people actually do multiple roles. So we never actually, went into that angle of, reducing resources due to the, let's say, advancement of technology. And again, we do believe that technology is more of an enhancer. It makes people, do their work in a more efficient manner. So we don't believe that we will ever get rid of, the human resources that we have. And actually, with the pandemic, we are now able to provide even more internships. We, within the courts, we have several programs that can encourage people who are interested in the court systems, even from an operational perspective, people, let's say, studying comms, IT, and so forth. Now we have even further opportunities. Historically, we can only have one at a time or two interns at a time. But now we are actually allowing interns to do them from a virtual landscape perspective. We have sometimes interns coming from Canada, from the US, and now we can actually do them remotely through specific assignments and having maybe ad hoc meetings. Of course, face-to-face gives that cutting-edge, let's say, experience, but we are able to even do more in terms of human capital investment. So we have internships, secondments. We are offering many training opportunities as well for our staff and the resources. So I do believe that with this new era, we are even able to invest more in human capital rather than reduce the number of people.
Well, thank you very much for your insight. And I know we're short on time, but is there anything else that you wanted to share with our audience, the last parting words and words of wisdom?
I just want to say that enjoy, where you are at the moment. Enjoy the best of, the pandemic, what it brought us. I believe it gave us many new learnings, including remote work, and that people actually need to get on with it rather than try to really force them into the traditional ways of doing business. And I think these are really important learnings and makes us even more efficient and enjoy what we do. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Are there any questions, or are we? I think. Anybody else that has any urgent questions that want to raise, or should we sign off? Okay, yes, there's.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Peace be upon you.
My own experience, I don't think in neither FARS or online court session is applicable because when it comes to some cases like inheritance and other, let alone crimes, okay? In remote areas, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, okay? It's the worst. Okay, let alone the cities, the big cities like Riyadh and Jeddah. We suffer a lot during the pandemic for attending this cases sessions. The judge, whenever he doesn't like whatever, he just pushes the button and cancel everybody. And also communication, okay? And the result of the end of the court session. I don't know, in your opinion, is this gonna be for a long time, or just because of the pandemic and stuff like that? I don't think it's applicable all the time, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm not so traditional when it comes to using the technology, but there are some cases you cannot apply technology seriously. Especially some people cannot use this. And when it comes to system down, I think we suffer a lot in the banks and in, let alone in the court session. Thank you.
Well, I think it's like you said, it's a work in progress and it's an evolving process. So I think we all had to learn very quickly and to embrace the new reality. But as Amna said, the court is planning to go at least at 20%, perhaps in physical form still, once the pandemic is completely over. So I don't know if you know any other plans, Dr. Habib, if the local courts are planning to kind of reopen physically at all and allow people to attend hearings in person, which I think is what you're addressing. Is that in the books? Do you know if they're planning to kind of reopen it or make it available again?
Yes, yes, it will gradually happen. It's not going to happen just overnight. And at the same time, as I said, it's some of functions will be and some functions will continue to be. At the end of the day, technology has glitches, but it's like cars having accidents. You don't stop driving cars because there are accidents.
Sure.
I think it depends really like on the country and on the, let's say, leadership of each country and where they want to be and how they want to continue. But at least as far as we're concerned here in Dubai and the UAE, I believe the way forward is to make services much more smart, again, continue that customer centricity and make it even more easy and accessible, and perhaps having the best of both worlds. Let's say the learning from the pandemic and pre-pandemic, we will have, the best balance of the best of the technology and virtual world, in addition to some cases and some instances that you actually need that human angle, the face-to-face interaction. So I believe, let's say in a year or 2 years' time, things will become more clear and more balanced, but I do believe that we'll retain the best of both ways of doing business.
Well, thank you. That's a great way to end the session. Oh, yes, another question. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you so much for this interesting panel. I have a question. You mentioned that there are cases of hearings when you have, you did it online, as I remember, yes? The hearing.
You're looking at me?
Yes, to Dr. Mulla, yes. Yes. So I wonder sometimes, there are some cases when body language is very important. It's not just facial expressions. So when you know he's a liar, he's not, the movement of hands, the shaking of the body, all this is very important in the body language. And as lawyers, as you need to learn, because communication is mutual exchange. It's giving and getting. So how does this work when it comes to online hearings and discussion? The floor is yours. Thank you.
It's a valid question, and it's a very valid concern that many in the legal industry have. I was meeting a few months ago with the QC from London, and this was exactly the point he was mentioning. He said, I need to see, and he was referring to witnesses, I need to see the witnesses, how does he act, how does he respond to the question, because that gives me the sense whether he is lying, he's telling the truth, what should be the next question, and so on. And that's why I'm saying it's not going to be like before. So there are things that will continue no matter what to be online. Procedural hearings, for example, especially in arbitration, with all the costs involved, no one, I think, will insist on a physical attendance or physical hearings or procedural matters. But when it comes to substantive issues like cross-examination, criminal cases, I think, yes, it will be more adequate to have it physically.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you both for a very insightful and engaging panel discussion, as always. And thanks, everybody, for being here at the end of the day and for your questions. And just a round of applause for the speakers.
Thank you.